I was really thrilled to go to Cuba last March as part of a delegation from UMass Amherst. And our people-to-people group was called Sustainable Agriculture, Food Systems, and Wellness. So that's really what I'll be focusing on tonight, is what we learned about that during our time there. So we did a lot of getting to know Cuba by meeting our fellow delegation members. There were 16 of us that went to UMass through UMass Amherst, and we got to know each other first by emailing back and forth and writing our biographies and getting to know each other then. And I heard about the trip. I was really envious when my friend Anne-Marie, who's in the back, went to Cuba. And I had been talking to my friend Mary Foster, who's a retired teacher in Oregon. How can we get to Cuba? And we looked at all kinds of different ways to get there. We first connected with a tour through Canada, and it was quite expensive, as you can imagine. And we were kind of stuck because she said, well, you know, I'm happy to get your tickets. I'm happy to make arrangements for you to go with us, but we can't guarantee you'll get in the country. So we took a step back and we kind of were looking to figure out how could we get to Cuba legitimately, legally, and not go through the back door. And we learned that there were really 12 ways that you can get there. You have to fall into a category. And the easiest for us was the people-to-people. We were very interested to learn about Cuba through the eyes of the people that work there and live there. So that seemed the best way to go. Out of the corner of my ear at a meeting regarding the food system in Connecticut, I hear this woman, Nancy Cohen, who is the department chair for the nutrition department at UMass, and she's talking about going to Cuba. And I stopped mid-sentence. I don't know who I was talking to, but I stopped mid-sentence when she mentioned Cuba, and the very next day I emailed her to find out how can I be a part of this delegation that she was putting together. The tickets and the passport and the health forms all seemed a little bit daunting. Of course, we received a packet of information. I think there was 20 pages just on the passport and the visa alone. The health forms, you know, everybody wanted to make sure that they had their vaccinations and that they were ready to go into the country, and that really nothing was going to keep us from getting in. Trying to understand exchanging money, because you can't use Visa or your debit card in Cuba. Making the exchange can be difficult, so we really had to find out what was the best way to go, and carrying large sums of cash is, you know, not something that I do anymore because, you know, most countries you can just use your Visa card. So, you know, and trying to figure out how much money to have. The other prohibition was that we could only spend $85 a day, and that was supposed to include our hotel. So we had to figure out, because it was a package deal, how are we doing, how much could we spend? And then phone cards, trying to figure out how we might be able to communicate with my husband, for example, back here in the States, which was turned out to be very difficult to do. So kind of getting all of that in the months that led up to it. So what's up with Cuba? I thought just a little bit of history, not a lot, not to make you feel like you're in class or anything, but kind of going back, one of the things that I found so fascinating about Cuba was the revolution. And I thought that it was truly something remarkable. So just a little bit of information. People know back then about the revolution in 1959 to overthrow Baptista. It was really headed up by Fidel Castro. And a lot of the reforms that Fidel Castro wanted to see were in the area of capitalism, and making sure that people that had nothing had something. At that time, there were a lot of casinos. The United States was investing in corporations. They were sending some of our corporations down to Cuba. So there was a lot of things that were happening at that time. So once Fidel overthrew Baptista, Cuba nationalized a lot of the American businesses that were down there. Well, that didn't make the Americans very happy because a lot of businesses were taken over by the Cubans. So then there was an embargo. And that had to do a lot with what was being traded back and forth. That led to the Soviet Union stepping in and saying, well, you know, if the United States won't give you what you need, we will. But we'd like to keep a few missiles there in Cuba. So there's been an embargo in place, and a lot of people in Cuba really call it not an embargo, but a blockade, which keeps the Cubans kind of stuck where they are, which is in the 1960s. So a lot of what we saw really hasn't changed much since then. We arrived in Cuba, and this was the very first time that we met each other in person. So it was really kind of fun to see each other's biography and get to know each other. There were professionals that were teachers, there were some retired teachers, authors, people in public health. We had somebody from the FDA that was there. Just really a little bit of everybody. A lot of dietitians, though, that you can imagine coming out of the nutrition program at UMass. So we arrived in the airport. Didn't look too communist to me. It looked like any other airport. We were all a little bit nervous about trying to get through and had our U.S. passports with us. Was so clean. I don't know what we were all thinking. We all kept looking at each other. It was clean, it was organized, it didn't look like a third world country. Then we stepped into the area where you get your luggage. And I've never seen so many people. And I guess what a lot of people do that either live there or can travel back and forth, they bring everything that their family's going to need. We saw bedding, we saw big, huge bags of all kinds of clothing and everything that you can think of, from paper to paper clips. And we also saw a lot of big screen TVs going that way. So finding our luggage, finding each other was a little bit of a chore. We had also heard about this health form. You had to fill out this health form. Everybody was worried about it. We thought that we were going to have our temperature taken when we started to walk through the gates. We found there was nobody sitting at the health table. We just threw our papers onto the table and we moved through. Got out to the parking lot, and this is where we kind of had one of those Wizard of Oz moments, thinking that we really weren't in the United States anymore, because of the cars, and they're just so amazingly colorful and old. And some of them are pristine, and others of them are held together with bubble gum and a rubber band. We also thought that there would be a lot of propaganda. You know, I'd been to other countries where you saw propaganda everywhere, and advertisements and political posters. Nothing. This was the first propaganda that we saw, and I think it was the second day. And when we asked our guide about pictures of Fidel Castro, which I thought would really be everywhere, they said it's really not what we do. We don't put up pictures of people who are still living. So Che Guevara was one of the freedom fighters in the revolution. His picture is what you see. You don't ever see a picture of Fidel Castro. Does this bring you back a little bit? We all picked out a car of our choice. We were going to bring it home. This was our hotel for the first couple of days. We got to know it very well, and we really ended up loving it. You can't really see, and I didn't take a lot of photographs, but the back porch where we ate our meals overlooked kind of this jungle area, and you really felt like for a few minutes that you were in Jurassic Park or, you know, one of those movies. As just amazing. Here's our group in front of the Department of Agriculture, because part of our tour was really to learn about the agricultural practices and the challenges of the Cuban people. This is our group. We were together 24/7. Our tour guide, Raul, was with us every step of the way. And I've got to say that as far as most tours go, your guide really is everything. He took us to some of the most amazing places. And if some place didn't work out, he had like a plan B, a plan C. He had things in his back pocket. He was on his cell phone. He was organizing another route for us to take, which was really great. So the first day we took a little driving tour, and there's a very famous drive in Havana called the Malecon. Everything happens at the Malecon. Sometimes the water is calm, other times it's splashing over into the convertibles that are driving by. Lots of people fishing, kissing, spending time with their kids. Really is a kind of a magical place. You can see the fort in the distance, and this is one of the areas in Havana where it was most vulnerable for people or countries to overtake Cuba. Love these little putt-putts. Those were a mode of transportation around Cuba. You can usually find somebody who would drive you just about anywhere for a couple of cents. We got an opportunity out of the bus the first day to really look at Cuba, and there's just so many contrasts. On the left, a building beautifully painted, updated, probably pristine inside, and then we would drive down a street where it looked like the buildings were toppling over, and there really hadn't been any revitalization in an area for maybe 50 years or so, and it showed. A lot of times you would drive down the street, there'd be potholes, the bus driver would have to take a different route. So lots of contrasting visual sites. They had some typical things, lots and lots of parks in Havana. It was really great fun to watch. We watched a whole bunch of kids skateboarding for a little while. During the Soviet support era of Cuba, there were a lot of Soviet or Russian buildings built, and we saw them everywhere. They were tall, they were steel, they were cold, they were edgy. They didn't look anything like the Cuban architecture that we really were looking at inside Havana. But we learned that they were built very quickly to house a maximum amount of people. People who would otherwise be living in huts, living in very poor conditions. And even these apartments, we understand, may be a room, maybe a quarter of the size of this room, with 5 or 6 or 2 families living inside. Socialism or death reads the side of this long wall. You saw a little bit of socialism and capitalism and communism kind of phrases mixed in. Another building as we got a little closer to where we were staying with a restaurant outside. And then a lot of patriotism. And it was so interesting for me to talk to people candidly about how they felt about their country and how they felt about Cuba and the United States relations. This says, "And my dreams will have no borders." I think this is kind of a famous photograph from people that are visiting Cuba. Lots of people wearing Che Guevara t-shirts. We passed this every single day from our hotel where we were staying in Havana. It's a huge sports club, and they've had a lot of games that have been at this place. And although we didn't really study sports, we understand that sports has been something that's very passionate in Cuba. A lot of people play baseball. We know of some Cubans that have come to the United States to play baseball. Cuban baseball players in Cuba will make about $50 a month. As opposed to 60 million here in the United States. But boxing is very common in Cuba, dancing, soccer, and really kind of the mode that we kept hearing about is that kids play for their country. It's a lot less about playing for a team and competing than it is about honoring your country and honoring your family. When was the last time you saw a payphone? Street signs are really a way that we navigated the streets. Sometimes we were able to break off from our group, which we never thought we were going to be able to do. And so one of the things that I did was I took pictures of the street signs so I would remember how to get back to where we were going. All the streets look the same. So this started our walking tour of Havana. One of the things that really struck us that we didn't walk down the street and see a whole bunch of people walking towards us looking into their cell phone. People have phones there, people use phones, but they don't have social media. So they talk on the streets, they get together in groups, they talk about politics, they talk about the day, their family, what's going on at school. It was really a breath of fresh air to us, and it was hard for us not to communicate. I don't think I called my husband until I had been there for maybe 7 days. So there was really no way of us communicating. And we learned that outside of our hotel, we would see these kids, and they were lined up on the street, and I kept asking people, what are they doing? Well, we had a hot spot at our hotel because they had the internet. So people would line up. And every once in a while, people would have their laptop or their tablet, and they'd be leaning up against the building of the hotel just to see if they could catch a signal. And that's really just to send an email. They don't have news online. They don't have YouTube or Snapchat or Instagram or Facebook or any of that stuff. So this was just purely to send an email. Lots of people selling produce on the street. Of course, this is a touristy area, so this is kind of the thing that you'll find. People salsa dancing in the street. Kind of fun for us. Cottage industries. Every once in a while you would see some cottage industries, and we actually went to a planned community where they encouraged people to sell what they made, which is a little bit outside of kind of the norm in Cuba. My friend Mary there on the right, and my new friend Maria, who lives in Long Island, who's a retired teacher. So we hung out quite a bit. Just some of the buildings, it just made me really want to buy property there because I saw what could be done. And what we heard was that if people had relatives in the United States that were sending them money, they could afford to fix up their house. But a can of paint would cost the average Cuban 3 months of their salary for one can of paint. So really the average person in Cuba makes about $20 a month. I wanted this car. I was trying to figure out a way of cozying up to the guy. But then I found, see that little sticker on the back there, the back window, says that he's a taxi. So that's how some people make money to fix up their cars, is they use their cars as taxis. So it's really kind of cool. Anybody have one of those when they were growing up? So we weren't talking about just a few of these. I thought, oh, yeah, there'll be one or two parked on the side of the road somewhere. They were everywhere, and we were gaga over them. Everybody wanted to take their picture. They wanted to have their picture taken in the car. We all wanted to pool our money so that we could take a taxi anywhere we could. So some signs of Fidel's Cuba, Che Guevara, and the way that Fidel talks about Che, he was really his kind of partner in the revolution and has a great deal of fondness and really encourages the people to idolize him in a lot of ways. So we talked a lot about Cubans' path to sustainability, and we really benefited from so many people that we got to meet along the way. The things that impressed me were their literacy rates. So right after the revolution, there were so many poor people that lived, especially in rural areas, that Fidel's Cuba enlisted the help of educated people that lived in the cities, and he sent them out for 2 years on a campaign to improve literacy. And so now their literacy rate is 96%. Education is free for 11 some odd million people. The prevention of disease is a huge economic driver in Cuba. and also agriculture. So the things that they invest their money in: agriculture, literacy, education, and disease prevention, which is so different than the United States. So education, we talked a little bit about that. It's amazing. The school children are everywhere. Their classroom is indoors and outdoors. The weather is so great there that they are on a field trip every single day. And the school children are great. We talked with a whole bunch of them. Of course, they like to have their picture taken just like kids anywhere. So a little bit about our speakers, and I won't go into a lot of detail, but we were really privileged with getting to know some of the forward thinkers in Cuba when it comes to their economy, when it comes to their health and their agriculture. We had great translators. They gave great presentations, and then after each presentation that we were given, we got together over a meal and we discussed what we learned, which was really amazing. In order to go on a people-to-people tour in Cuba, you have to agree to 40 hours of education within 7 days. So the day was jam-packed, and we went from place to place to place. There are a lot more human rights organizations and advocacy groups than really I thought. I thought, well, nobody's really going to be a free thinker in Cuba, right? It's communist. There were so many advocacy groups and so many organizations that are founded on building relationships. Everywhere we were greeted with warmth. We also got an opportunity outside of those 40 hours to experience some music and culture, and it was everywhere. And I think that was one of the things that was really impressive about Cuba and where they're at right now. They're waiting for the embargo to be lifted. They're waiting to be able to sell their music, to sell their artwork, to open up their own business, to have broader communications, to get news from the world. It's such an exciting time in Cuba right now. We were treated to rooftop, our own concerts by people. We found guys on the street that played for us. We went to dinner one night and we had these 3 incredible and very good-looking young men that came in and sang opera to us. It's not just Caribbean music like I thought. There's Western African music. There's all kinds of various soulful jazz music. The other thing that we did was we went to some art galleries, which was really fun. There's a brand new art gallery called La Fabrique. And galleries in general in Cuba are not permitted to open or to sell artwork. It's very, very strict through the government. So this is a brand new art gallery. They don't sell anything, but it's multimedia. So they had music, they had film, they had all kinds of really interesting artwork that I haven't seen in the United States much because they don't have things like oil paints to paint beautiful canvases. They have all kinds of interesting things that they've recycled, for example. Lots of photography. We were able to meet Roberto Salas, and this was one of the things that cinched it for me because I do love photography. This is Fidel Castro's personal photographer. He was actually born in the United States, but very early in his career, he began following Fidel around. And I think that he probably bugged him so much, he said, all right, be my personal photographer. But he's taken some of the most iconic photographs of Castro visiting all kinds of places. And in the bottom, you can see there's kind of a grainy picture of him with Ernest Hemingway. He talked to us about restrictions in Cuba in terms of personal display of creativity. And he really went through each one of his photographs with us. He was very kind. He actually opened up his home to us, gave us coffee, which was great, and introduced us to his family. And then he talked outside, of course, having a cigarette for another half an hour, just about life in Cuba and how he's enjoyed living there. Casa Fuster is a wonderful place. There was a great local artist who began doing mosaics around his house, and it caught on. And now half of the city is all mosaics. And where oil paint was really difficult to come by, there was lots and lots of broken pottery, all kinds of things that could be revitalized. So it was so fun to go here. And my husband's in the audience here. He knows I like to do a lot of mosaics and using different colors and revitalizing different things using pottery. So that was very exciting. This was the grandma boat that Fidel Castro and his revolutionaries came to Havana in order to overthrow Batista. But this whole section of the city was covered with mosaics. They did a mosaic wall to a lot of the other Caribbean and Latin countries. We didn't see a lot of artwork of Fidel Castro, but here's a little. The food was incredible. We were a little bit timid, as public health folks are generally when they're traveling. We all looked at each other a lot when the fresh cucumbers and lettuce and stuff came out on the table. But as time went on, we got a little bit more daring. None of us got sick. It was all great. We had a lot of fish in Cuba. We were told not to eat the chicken so much because it comes from Vietnam and other places. But the fish was great, lots of beans and rice, as you can imagine, for every single meal. Down in the corner on the right-hand side, we went to a really wonderful botanical garden and had a beautiful organic meal there. But it was really one of the highlights of our day, is really just to sit and talk about how we had experienced life. This is my friend Mary and I have to say, there was a Friday during our trip, and we were just exhausted. And we kind of hung back. So the group went. We asked if we could get downtown somehow. And she was Muslim, so she wanted to go to the mosque on that day. And we found a very touristy restaurant and had an iced coffee. And that was like our big indulgence. But what we paid for that iced coffee was $20. The same amount that people make in a month. We spent having 2 iced coffees. So it only happened once. This is the mosque. We are told that there are so many different religions. It's primarily Catholic, but there are lots of religions. There's not a lot of discrimination. There really are no hate crimes. So we really felt that was kind of an interesting thing. Agriculture. So we visited a lot of different gardens, botanical gardens, Las Teresas, which I'll talk about a little bit, cooperative urban farms, and of course tobacco, their big crop there. We got to visit some plantations and also some factories. This is Raul, our tour guide, and Jose, who's up there driving the bus. Spent a lot of time on this bus. So Valley of Vinales, and it's in the Pinar del Rio area, and it was amazing. It was so great to get outside of Havana, because that was really, when I thought of Cuba, I thought of Havana. I didn't really think of all these rural areas, so to get outside of the area was beautiful, and the valley was amazing. One of our first stops was to a tobacco farm, and we learned about growing tobacco and how they really use the tobacco. It's kind of a pretty plant. We all wanted to take a little home with us. So drying the tobacco. The tobacco is a big business, and it's also a very serious business in Cuba. It doesn't happen overnight. The drying process can take a very long time. It's cured, it's fermented. Sometimes flavors are added to it or scents are added to it. But it's really kind of a beautiful thing to walk into a barn and see nothing but tobacco hanging from the rafters. We were given a treat. This guy actually is rolling cigars, sitting there, rolling cigars. I have a couple that I haven't smoked yet on the table. You're welcome to look at them. I brought those back. But we were told that we really couldn't purchase any cigars unless they were at a particular shop, and the price was controlled by the government. But it was really fascinating to watch this guy roll tobacco. We also went to the cigar factory, and the 500 workers at this cigar factory roll about 20,000 cigars every day. They put them in these kind of like egg crate looking things, and they press them. It keeps them fresh and helps to form them and keep them in the right shape. It's really impressive to see floors and floors and floors in this building. I actually took this photograph from I think from the internet someplace, because we weren't allowed to photograph inside. And so when I came back, I was kind of looking for a photograph to be able to describe this. It takes 9 months of training without pay to become a roller. And one of the things that I was most impressed with is that there's somebody on a microphone all the time reading books, either about history or about the news, reading the newspaper. So I thought that that was really great to keep people entertained as they're going through their day. Of course, cigars are a big product in Havana. They weren't as cheap as I thought. You're allowed to bring $100 back with you, and that was about 10 cigars, I guess. So the botanical garden, everything there is organic. So after the revolution and the Soviet Union pulled out of their support when they collapsed, of their support of Cuba, there really wasn't a lot of fertilizer. There wasn't a lot of pesticides. There was really nothing. So farmers had to use what they had, and they had to learn new methods of farming, which is very interesting. This is their pest control management. You see a lot of screens over plants a lot in Cuba, and it's really because there's no other ways to keep the bugs away from the plants. Again, we had an excellent guide that led us through the botanical garden and explained their growing practices, how they save seeds because they can't get seeds either. Very interesting, and I never saw better soil in my entire life. It was beautiful. In this photograph, you can see in the back, in the middle, a high-rise. And it wasn't uncommon to see a neighborhood, a botanical garden, or a garden of vegetables close to a high-rise. So in urban areas, it seemed like every neighborhood had its garden, and there were lots of cooperatives where people could belong to. People put time in the garden, and then they get food to eat. Vermiculture is very widespread in Cuba. This is using worms to make compost that could be used either directly onto the plants or as tea, adding water to it. Very common. There's my artisticness for you. That's my one great photograph. But again, just really seeing the way and the care that is taken in these gardens, and the produce looks beautiful. I was very surprised to learn, though, that Cuba has to import 70 to 80% of their food. They simply don't have enough food in Cuba for all the consumption. And think about that when you think about all those tourists that are going now to Cuba. That was the other thing that I was a little bit surprised by. I thought we were going to be the only non-Cubans in Cuba, just our 16 people. And when I got there, of course, I saw tour buses, and I thought, well, who are these people? Well, they come from Germany, they come from, Europe, they come from other countries. It's just us. It's just the United States that's not there. All these other people have been vacationing in Cuba for a long time. The old-fashioned time clock, you write on your timesheet. Sugarcane production, which is way down. It used to be a staple. It used to be one of the largest exports for Cuba, and now all of that's changed. They have a lot of fruit that we don't have, and not all of it tastes good. So again, the backdrop of many urban farms. Again, this is a building built by the Soviet Union back in the day to house lots and lots of people that are lower socioeconomic. our group walking through the botanical garden. Very, very interesting how much detail is placed on agriculture, on saving seeds, on saving plants, especially rare plants for Cuba. They really take good care, and they have guards that are here watching the plants. Amazing. So Las Teresas, how many of you have been to Cuba? I forgot to ask. So a few of you. Las Teresas is this community that was established by Fidel's Cuba. And it's pretty interesting because it's part bioreserve and part community of people. We had a beautiful woman who talked to us very plainly about slavery. A lot of people don't realize that Cuba was very heavily populated by slaves. And they talked about how, as time went on and there were so many people who were still left in rural areas, really not managing life in very poor health, very poorly educated, the Las Teresas became this community, albeit fabricated, but a community like a kibbutz where people could live together and work together and really have a better quality of life. So this is a little bit experiment and a little bit touristy because there's some ecotourism in this area as well. Again, lots of emphasis on plants and plants that they have only in Cuba. A lot of information about the French. Buena Vista is this French coffee plantation. Apparently, when the French came in and took over this area, they stripped every single coffee plant and plant out of this area because they thought they knew how to grow coffee better. Well, the soil wasn't compatible with the kinds of plants that they were planting, and basically a lot of people starved and then left. But in the process, they clear-cut the whole area and left it in really poor shape. So the government has taken this area over and rebuilt this area. It's very biodiverse, and it was evident. This was area where slaves would have lived at one time or been when they weren't producing coffee. Again, we learned a lot about coffee as it is now, and about 80% of the people that live in Cuba actually work for the government. So if they're growing coffee for the government. If they're growing fruits and vegetables, they're growing that for the government. They may get a little bit of a stipend for their time. They may get food for their family, but basically they're working for the government. Our tour guide, Joel, was so knowledgeable. Tour guides in Cuba, it's very tightly regulated. They have to go to school for a very long time to be a tour guide, and he gave us a lot of really great information. The cavassa is a major crop that they have. It's kind of like a potato. The outside has a toxin in it, so it has to be cooked off or peeled off. It can actually cause paralysis. But this is the crop that makes tapioca. And so many of us benefit from this crop. It's very, very common there, and it was served a lot, kind of like mashed potatoes. This is the area where the coffee would have been laid out to dry in the sun. This is just a kind of they've revitalized it, but it's not used anymore. This is how they would have ground the coffee. We were told that one of the things coffee growers are looking forward to is being able to grow coffee and then sell coffee, because there's actually different qualities. A bean is not a bean is not a bean. And so right now the government just buys all the coffee, and then they figure out where the premier beans are, and they can sell those at a higher cost. The coffee grower gets nothing more for having a better crop. We were a very curious group. We had lots of questions. So this is one of the farmers, and he's growing this food for his family, but then also for the government. The farm was pristine, pristine. This is his family, and they're working right alongside the farm to feed their children. I think they were making a meal while we were there. There were kids playing. Vermiculture again, they're very proud of the quality of their soil that has very little disease as part of it. This guy was just out having a cigarette. I thought he was great. I thought he was posing a little bit, so I thought, okay, well, I'll keep taking your picture. So I have like 20 pictures of this guy. He was like my Juan Valdez. Just outside the bus, but again, you can see some of the high rises in the back. So I tried to look up the name for this guy. Apparently in farming, in agriculture, there's this banter that happens. And it's kind of like the Cuban version of yo mama. So they call each other out. And our guide was onto this guy. He had the bus pull over. He called the guy onto the bus, and they did this little banter back and forth. So it was kind of like half sing-songy, half kind of in your face, half laughing at each other. It was really, really charming to see, and I loved it. I wish you would have videotaped it. When we were there, Obama was there. And so it made life a little difficult. We got, one day we found out that our hotel rooms had been given away. Apparently Obama brought some people with him. So in preparation for the next place that we were going to stay, Raul decided that he was going to take us to the Saturno Caves, which was really, really fun. And I don't have a lot of pictures in here, but practically in the dark, we were going down into this cave and getting into a boat that we couldn't even see. So it was kind of fun and funny. Again, more gardens. We went to a beautiful orchid garden that had over 1,000 species of orchids. And again, just very well taken care of. I don't think my photographs really do it justice. So when you go to Cuba, like you're all going to go after this, right? You're all going to go get your tickets to go to Cuba. So you can stay in hotels that are a little bit pricier, but you can also stay in casa particulars. And these are people's homes. They rent out a room. It might cost $20 for you to stay there, and they throw in a meal. They spend the evening with you, talking to you about their life. It's really a great way to go through Cuba. And you can find people online, and you can write to people and make arrangements in advance. But this is a typical casa particular. Beautiful little library, people again sitting out chatting. Okay, so the medical system, we went through kind of agriculture. The medical system was, again, one of the things as a public health educator, I was very curious about their medical system. I thought because the country was third world, considered third world, had been kind of stuck in the 1950s, that they had poor health, but it's not the case. So they have free health care for the most part for everybody. They also classify every single person in Cuba. So you're classified as one of 5 stages. You're either totally healthy, no problems at all. You have an acute illness that needs to be taken care of, and then you move along. You have a chronic illness that can be managed. You have some serious illnesses that put you in the hospital and more chronic, or you're entering into hospice. So they have those 5 classifications, and everybody has them. Also, everybody has a healthcare team. Can you imagine having a healthcare team? Everybody has a doctor, a nurse, a pharmacist, a dietitian, and a psychiatrist. Cool, huh? They also spend much more on prevention than in the United States. Their diabetes rate is going up, but it's half what ours is. Their fetal infant mortality rate is lower than ours, and their life expectancy rate is the same as it is in the United States. They also have so much biotechnology, and they have more physicians per capita than any other country. When we had Hurricane Katrina, they actually contacted the United States and said, we'll send you physicians. And the United States said, no, thank you. When physicians go to school, they go to school for free, and they're told where they're going to practice. So that's kind of the catch. So you can go to college for free. As long as you're getting good grades, you can keep going in their educational system at no cost. So the way that they work it is they have a physician who gets their medical degree, and then they let them know what neighborhood they're assigned to. So every neighborhood has their neighborhood physician. They spend half their time in the clinic, seeing patients, and then they spend half their time in the neighborhoods going door to door and making house calls. Sweet. We had to try to be really respectful, not to take photographs of patients, so I just took a few of kind of this is like the waiting area outside to go into a part of the clinic. This is really one of the only places that I saw a picture of Raul Castro, and he's talking about working together and working hard and kind of mobilizing for the people. They had a lot of posters put up. I felt right at home. I felt like I was at a public health department. But these pictures on hand washing, on disinfecting, lots and lots of education. And the way I understand it is when the physician goes out into the neighborhood, they bring a lot of prevention information. Here's more information on heart disease. And I love this. Kind of tells you what not to do at the bottom. But then it also, talks about eating fresh fruits and vegetables, not smoking. And I think that if I understand right, about 50% of the population of men smoke. So lung cancer is one of the leading causes of death, and cancer is the leading cause of death there. So there are a lot of posters, a lot of information about cancer. So we went to a talk about diabetes, and I won't go into it too much, but it's the 8th leading cause of death in Cuba. It's rising. They're very concerned about it. But the thing that I found most interesting was this. This is my One Lake data slide. So one of the things that they do is they identify a problem, and they all work together, not like our government. They all work together. So there's the medical part, there's the education part, and there's the research part. They're on it. And all of these professionals work together to solve medical problems. It's really very interesting. You can see that this is kind of what they did for diabetes. They pulled together all their endocrinologists, all their residents. They did their studies. They mobilized all their medical professionals. They found actually some new medicines that help wounds heal faster, that guard against blindness, so that helps keep people from having amputations associated with diabetes. And they really have started to drive down the numbers and also diminish some of the long-term consequences of diabetes in Cuba. I also saw a lot of spraying of DDT because of Zika. This was in March, so this was before they were spraying in Miami. I asked what was in the stuff they were spraying, because there were a couple of times we went into a building, you could still smell what they had sprayed in there. And we were told that it was DDT, probably with some kind of heavy metal. So we weren't too excited about that, but because of the rain, and it rains so often in Cuba, the heavy metal helps it to saturate, I guess, onto surfaces. So a little bit about politics, and then I'll end. We were very fortunate to go to an organization that was instrumental in freeing the Cuban Five. Does anybody know about the Cuban Five? These were 5 Cuban guys who were intelligence officers, but they were arrested in the United States. They came in 1998 to actually look at terrorism in the United States to see if there was going to be terrorism that would affect Cuba. But they were arrested for conspiracy to commit murder, acting as an agent of a foreign government, to commit espionage, and some of these 5 individuals were in prison for 15 years before released. We were very lucky to meet Fernando Gonzalez, who was one of the 5 people imprisoned. He told his story and through an interpreter, but it was a story of so much patriotism for Cuba. It almost made me cry. It was really very moving. We also got an opportunity to really sit down and talk about relationships between the United States and Cuba, a lot of the misconceptions that Americans have about Cuba, and a lot of the misconceptions that Cubans have about America, that we would be their panacea, that if the embargo were lifted, life would be, grand. So it was very interesting. We were there the day that Obama arrived. This is us, and we're in some building, some official building, where they had a television, and they showed Obama's arrival into Cuba. They showed everything about his being there because they wanted the people of Cuba to see this. Everybody was talking about it. This woman gave me the beads I have on, and she said for me to thank Obama for coming, like we're best friends. We walked into a little shop. Every little shop had a small TV, and it was on. And these people had their faces pressed against the television watching Obama. It was amazing. People just really wanted to talk to us about the United States. And I didn't say a lot about the people that we met, but people would come up to us in the street, knowing that we were from the United States, to ask us about the United States. How is it there? You know, they think every road is lined with gold here. They want to know about the United States. They thanked us for being there, for coming to see them. It was really remarkable, really, really remarkable. This is us kind of looking at the TV. We were captivated. We didn't see a lot of signs, but I found this one on one of the streets with Castro and Obama. There were people that were weeping in the street. You can see there were people all over the place. There were people trying to guess where they were going. They were going to the opera one night. So there must have been, I don't know, thousands and thousands of people outside the opera house just wanting to get a glimpse of him. This is the motorcade going by. You can maybe see Obama in the back seat. We waited for hours, and everybody there it was just amazing. This is just some random pictures. This is us. We went into a grocery store because, of course, half of us were dietitians, and so they all wanted to look at labels of food that were at the grocery store. We were curious about where the food came from. You know, if 80% is coming from someplace else, where? Because it's not coming from the United States. So we found mayonnaise that was coming from Holland. We found, all kinds of odds and ends, and it really didn't seem like it had any rhyme or reason. It didn't seem like it was foods that we had been eating in the restaurants or that we had been served. It was like random stuff, like pickles. The last day that we were there, we were given free rein to go just about anywhere. And we were told not to go to the beach, not to be caught looking like we were having a good time. So I walked around a lot just with my camera, and I was so taken by the buildings. I found them to be edgy because they were rusty and crumbling, and yet there was so much life coming out of them. I don't think I've ever been to a place in the world that felt so lively. There was so much life happening. Conversation, music, dance, people fixing things on the side of the road, people hanging out of their balconies talking to somebody 5 floors down. It was amazing. This woman I watched forever. I loved watching her, and I blew this picture up just a little bit so you can kind of see her. But that just reminded me of what my take-home, vision was of Cuba. Parks everywhere in Havana. And I really am sad that I only had 10, 11 days there. It went by so fast. We spent so much time going from place to place and really trying to learn a lot. And I didn't even show you a lot of the stuff that we did just kind of as tourists. Howell always found fun places for us to go. It could be 9 o'clock at night and he's knocking on everybody's door saying he's taking us to a jazz club. Just some random place, or he'll hear that somebody's performing someplace, and on the bus we went, and here comes Jose driving the bus up. So we just had a blast. This was our last night there. We honored both our bus driver and our guide. We all kind of pooled our money to give him a gift at the end. This was the view from our restaurant, and it was probably the hoity-toityest place that we went the whole time. It was our last night. It was really a great treat. Beautiful vision of the Malecon and the cars going down there. And then as we were leaving the airport, we saw Air Force One. That was so exciting for us. It was really kind of an iconic kind of way to end our trip, I think. And I'll just end with a quote from Che Guevara, and I'll really encourage you to watch on YouTube. There was a documentary made about his life, and it's really great. The fundamental thing is that we are all able to make something every day that perfects what we made the previous one. And I thought that was just so beautiful and beautifully said about the cause, the revolution that they were in, and their hopes and dreams for a better Cuba. Well, thank you all for coming today.